And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and Hartmann Report.
We take life back!
The Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back by Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction titled The Battle to Save Democracy. Excuse me. On September 2nd, 2009, the transnational pharmaceutical giant Pfizer pled guilty to multiple criminal felonies. It had been marketing drugs in a way that may well have led to the deaths of people, and that definitely led physicians to prescribe and patients to use pharmaceuticals in a way that for which they were not intended. Because Pfizer is a corporation, a legal abstraction really, it couldn't go to jail like fraudster Bernie Madoff or killer John Dillinger. Instead, it paid a $1.2 billion criminal fine to the U.S. government, the biggest in history, as well as an additional $1 billion in civil penalties. The total settlement was more than $2.3 billion, another record. None of Pfizer's executives, decision makers, stockholders, owners, or employees saw even 5 minutes of the inside of a police station or a jail. Most Americans don't even know about this huge and massive crime, nor do they know that the criminal never spent a day in jail. But they do know that in the autumn of 2004, Martha Stewart was convicted of lying to investigators about her sale of stock in another pharmaceutical company. Her crime cost nobody their life, but she famously was escorted off to a women's prison. Had she been a corporation instead of a human being, odds are there would not have even been an investigation. Yet over the past century, and particularly the past 40 years, corporations have repeatedly asserted that they are, in fact, persons, and therefore eligible for the human rights protections of the Bill of Rights. In 2009, the right-wing advocacy group Citizens United argued before the Supreme Court that they had the First Amendment right to free speech and to influence elections through the production and distribution of a slasher documentary designed to destroy Hillary Clinton's ability to win the Democratic nomination. Some political observers assert that they did this in part because they believed that a black man whose first name sounded like Osama and whose middle name was Hussein could never, ever possibly win against a Republican, no matter how poor a candidate they put up. In that, they were following on a 2003 case before the Supreme Court in which Nike claimed it had the First Amendment right to lie in its corporate marketing, a variation of the First Amendment right of free speech. Corporations haven't limited their grasp to the First Amendment. Pretty much any and virtually every amendment that could be used to further corporate interests has been fair game. As you'll learn in this book, in previous decades, a chemical company took to the Supreme Court a case asserting its Fourth Amendment right to privacy from the EPA, snooping into its illegal chemical discharges. Other corporations have asserted Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, as well as asserting the 14th Amendment, passed after the Civil War to strip slavery from the Constitution, asserting that it protects their right against discrimination by a local community that doesn't want them building a toxic waste incinerator, commercial hog operations, or superstores. If this trend continues, it's probably just a matter of time before a corporation claims the Second Amendment right to bear arms anywhere, anytime, and your credit card company's bill collector shows up at your home with a sidearm. This legal situation is not only bizarre, but also quite the opposite of the visions for this country held by the founders of the nation and the framers of the Constitution. They were sufficiently worried about corporate power that they didn't even include in the Constitution the word corporation, intending instead that the states should tightly regulate corporate behavior which the states did quite well until just after the Civil War. The American Revolution, you'll learn in this book, was in fact provoked by the misbehavior of a British corporation. Our nation was founded in an anti-corporate power fury. The most significant and oft-quoted precedent of the turning point of corporate power in America began just after the Civil War. It rested on a constitutional amendment successfully written and passed by a group of radical Republicans after the Civil War. That's what they called themselves, radical Republicans, to take slavery out of the Constitution. Given that today's Republican Party has, largely since the robber baron era of the 1880s, been the party of big business and the very rich, it's a bit difficult for some people to get their minds around the possibility that the Republican Party started out as a reform party, that for nearly 70 years, from before Abraham Lincoln until just after Theodore Roosevelt left the party to start a third party, had a strong progressive wing. But the Republican Party did. Although Lincoln was, by today's standards, a moderate Republican, he was still anti-slavery, pro-middle class, and pro-labor. In fact, he famously said labor is superior to capital because it precedes capital. Nobody has wealth until somebody makes something. And he was the first president both to use the word strike in public and to actually stop police and private armies from killing and beating strikers. And just like in today's mainstream Democratic Party, where there's a progressive minority that always seems to be pushing the edges, in the Republican Party in the 1800s,
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, it's a wild and crazy Wednesday. It's a brand new day. We had, just FYI, our entire internet service for this entire part of Portland where we are located went down about 20 minutes ago and stayed down for about 15 minutes, just came back up about 5 minutes ago. And so, you know, there may be gremlins or glitches and it might crash again. So just FYI, particularly to our radio station affiliates, if suddenly we vanish, you know, just stay with us. But, you know, you can reach out to Westwood One if you're a radio station. You can reach out to Free Speech TV, you know, whatever. But we'll try to keep you up to date. So Mike Johnson, who is Mike Johnson? Donald Trump has endorsed him for Speaker. That should tell you everything you need to know. We'll get to that in just a moment. They're going to vote in just a few minutes in the House of Representatives on him as Speaker of the House. I'm not holding my breath. We'll see. You know, it's, but anyhow, I'll fill you in on that. Also, holy crap, Mark Meadows is cutting a plea deal too, or at least that's the reporting from ABC. Mark Meadows' lawyer is saying, no, not quite right. I'll tell you about that. And also, the day after Sidney Powell cries in court and says, yes, I'm guilty. I did all those things. I'm so sorry. She goes on social media and says, I was threatened and coerced into making this confession. Why don't they just pull her confession? Just say, okay, that's fine. You think you were coerced? We're not going to do that. We'll just take you to trial. Anyhow, we'll talk about that in the first hour. In the second hour of our program, America, and not just America, by the way, the entire world. In fact, we're seeing this right now in Acapulco, in Mexico. A tropical storm went from tropical storm status to Cat 5 hurricane in 9 hours. This has never before happened anywhere in the world, as far as anybody can tell. And you've got 1 million people in Acapulco right now who have lost power. They've lost internet. Speaking of losing internet, you know, there's no pictures coming out of there. There's no data coming out of there. There's the last contact anybody's had with Acapulco was, you know, the middle of the night last night. So anyhow, I'll tell you about that and this mysterious tipping point, climate tipping point that we seem to have hit. Also, that's how bad climate change has gotten. And in the third hour of the program, Florida's asking the Supreme Court to block rulings limiting an anti-drag show law, but hate lives on and history repeats itself. I'll tell you about that in the third hour. Also, Tommy Tuberville has refused to budge on his blockade of the U.S. military. Another pro-Putin Republican trying to damage our military readiness. I never thought I'd live to see the day. I honestly never did. That the Republican Party would become the party that is devastating to the American military. It's just breathtaking. So anyhow, Mike Johnson is the guy who is right now being voted on before the House of Representatives, or shortly will be voted on. They haven't yet called the vote. He represents the 4th District of Louisiana. He's been in Congress since 2017. He was elected in the 2016 election, the one that brought Donald Trump into the White House. He's 51 years old. He was the chair from 2019 to 2021 of the Republican Study Committee. This is one of the most right-wing of the right-wing kind of think tank groups that propose right-wing legislation, you know, stuff to criminalize being gay, criminalize being trans, criminalize being a pregnant woman. You know, it just goes on, right? Criminalize books. Yeah. Before entering politics, he was the senior attorney and spokesman for the Alliance Defending Freedom. That's the group that put together the lawsuit in Louisiana that went to the Supreme Court in the Dobbs decision. That's who this guy is. He wants religious activity in public schools. He wants Christian prayer at town meetings. He wants the coverage of contraceptives under the Affordable Care Act to be narrowed or eliminated. He wants same-sex marriage to be banned. He wants businesses in the wedding industry who refuse to support gay marriage to be supported. The ADF lawyers also wrote the model for Mississippi's anti-abortion legislation that led to the Dobbs case. The Southern Poverty Law Center has designated ADF as an anti-LGBTQ hate group. Before being elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, Mike Johnson was in the Louisiana State House from 2015 to 2017 there. He authored the Marriage and Conscience Act, which basically was, you know, one of the pieces that says if you're an anti-gay bigot, we're good with you. In 2017, he voted to repeal Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. In 2017, he supported Donald Trump's Muslim ban. He voted for the Trump tax cut, the $2 trillion tax cut that has added now at least $4 or $5 trillion to our national debt. He was in both of Trump's impeachments, 2019 and 2021. He was a defense attorney for both impeachments. And in 2021, he was the key architect of this strategy to overturn the 2020 election. And in 2023, he voted to shut down the government. He wants a nationwide ban on abortion. He wants Biden impeached. I mean, it just doesn't get crazier. As you know, you line up all the right-wing crazy stuff, and there's Mike Johnson. It's pretty amazing. Meanwhile, Mark Meadows. Now, Mark Meadows is the guy who could do some serious damage to Donald Trump because he was Donald Trump's chief of staff. He was his right-hand man. He was his confidant. During that time, Donald Trump thought that he had absolute presidential immunity, that anybody he talked to was either his lawyer, and therefore he had, you know, lawyer-client privilege, or worked for him in the White House, and therefore he had presidential privilege. And so he was speaking fairly, you know, plainly to Mark Meadows. And this during the time that Donald Trump was watching as the Capitol was under assault, as people were trying to hang the Vice President of the United States and murder the Speaker of the House. Mark Meadows was there as Donald Trump was sitting there giddily watching all this stuff go down. I mean, he could do some really serious damage. And according to the ABC News report, quote, according to sources, Meadows has also told federal investigators Trump was being dishonest with the public when he first claimed to have won the election only hours after polls closed on November 3rd, 2020, before the final results were in. Meadows privately, again, this is ABC News, Meadows privately told Smith's investigators that would be, you know, Special Prosecutor Jack Smith, investigators that to this day he has yet to see any evidence of fraud that would have kept Joe Biden out of the White House. ABC reports that its reporters have found numerous assertions about the 2020 election in Meadows' 2021 book, The Chief's Chief, that, quote, appear to be contradicted by what Meadows allegedly told investigators behind closed doors. In other words, Meadows was not only there as this conspiracy was going on to, you know, to destroy American democracy and make Trump dictator for life. He was not only there for it, he was part of it. And he was not only part of it, but when he published his book continued as part of it. In other words, he was promoting lies in his book. that were, you know, the ongoing Trump coup effort. But I think most importantly, he was in the West Wing throughout that entire period of time. By the way, he's also still facing racketeer charge. Now, this was, first of all, Mark Meadows' lawyer has come out and said this report by ABC News is not entirely true. So, you know, we're going to have to wait for the other shoe to drop on this thing. But this was in the federal case in D.C., where Jack Smith is going after Donald Trump. And, you know, Mark Meadows is apparently flipped there. So now he's also got this whole Fonnie Willis thing down in Georgia, where Ken Chesebro, Jenna Ellis, I mean, you know, it's getting wild. And Trump is just, you know, he's like, oh, well, you know, they're all liars and they're all grifters and it's all a scam and, you know, they're all taught to get me. And no, I mean, well, you know, yeah, they are liars and grifters on behalf of Donald Trump, but they got busted. And now, you know, now they're having to, oh, gee, what was I doing? I didn't mean that. How did that come? You know, quack, quack, quack. It's getting wild. It's getting very wild. Crazy alert the day after, Sidney Powell claims that her plea deal was extorted. I'll tell you about that on the other side of the break, and I'll be picking up your calls. What's on your mind? What are you seeing in the news that has your jaw dropping? Stay tuned.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And what are your thoughts on Mike Johnson for Speaker of the House? How do you think this thing is going to shake out? You know, I thought I understood this. I'm starting to think nobody knows. And welcome back. Let's see here. Kevin in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom.
Hey, Kevin.
I don't know if you talk much about what's going on here in North Carolina, but the legislature here is voting on the new district maps.
Yeah.
And they're just gerrymandered all to hell. We're basically going to be looking at a 7-7 split, Republicans and Democrats, to like a 10-4 or 11-3 edge to Republicans. They took like 3 Democrats and completely redrew them out of their districts. There was one draft that I read where they took 2 black representatives, Don Davis and Valerie Foushee, and merged their 2 districts so that one of them would have to lose. It's not good. Yeah. And, you know, this is all because, and I think you've talked about this, our state Supreme Court basically reheard the gerrymandering case from the previous court.
Right.
And struck down that ruling and basically told the legislature you can do whatever you want. And because they have a supermajority, you know, our governor, Roy Cooper, can't do anything either.
Is North Carolina the state where a Democrat flipped Republican and handed the legislature, or was that South Carolina?
No, that's here. That's Tricia Cotham,
right?
Who I think I've talked to you about before.
Yeah.
And well, matter of fact, by the way, they redrew her district too, so she'd be in a more friendlier red area.
Wow.
So
Amazing.
it's pretty bad. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's going to be lawsuits. Yeah. But, you know, I'm not really sure where this is going to go. But it's not looking good for our voter base here in North Carolina.
Yeah. And that would add 3 or 4 new Republicans to the House of Representatives, too.
Yeah, that's the other big issue. So,
which makes it even harder for the Democrats to take control of the House. That's incredible. And your Supreme Court flipped because of an election, right?
Yeah, there was an election, and it flipped to a right-leaning state Supreme Court, and they decided to rehear the gerrymandering case that was ruled unconstitutional by the previous court. Right. They reheard that and struck it down, and basically told the legislature, do whatever you want to do.
Isn't Crew or one of those citizens, a public citizen, or one of those good government groups, aren't one of them suing at the federal level to try to block this gerrymander? Or would they have to wait until after it's passed the House and Senate there?
I think they have to wait till after it's passed. I mean, they're voting on it right now today.
Mm-hmm.
It went through the Senate yesterday, and the House is voting today.
Right.
I think I saw on Twitter that Mark Elias is looking at suing them.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, who knows what's going to go down?
Yeah, and who knows what the 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court will do once it gets to them. They surprised us in Louisiana, but on the other hand, the Shelby County decision still stands. So, Kevin, thank you. Thanks for the update from North Carolina. I do appreciate it, and thank you very much. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Stay tuned. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. The MAGA Republicans have a plan for America. It involves something called fascism. It's a 3-step plan, actually, to take over America and turn us into a fascist state. They're following the example of Vladimir Putin in Russia and Viktor Orban in Hungary. Viktor Orban, who is held up by conservatives as the example of how a country should be run. He came to Texas to give a speech to CPAC and got a standing ovation. So the 3 steps. Number 1, take over the electoral systems and basically rig them, along with massive gerrymandering. Number 2, build a fascist base by mobilizing hate against minorities, gender minorities, racial minorities, religious minorities, while merging with one of the large factions of a church and the billionaires in the country. And number 3, seize control of state power and turn the criminal justice system against your enemies. There's an op-ed about the whole thing over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Revealed, the MAGA Republicans' 3-Step Plan for Classic Fascism. Check it out. And welcome back. So Jenna Ellis, this is fascinating. I'm not even sure exactly what to make of this. I have one possible theory, which is that Jenna Ellis doesn't actually control her own social media feed. That's a possibility. I mean, excuse me. She goes into court yesterday, and with tears in her eyes and a quivering voice, she says, "I'm so sorry," and these are from memory. I'm not verbatim quoting her, but basically, "I'm so sorry, I lied to the people of Georgia. I apologize to the people of Georgia. I committed a crime. I knew it was a crime. I knew that Trump didn't win the election, and I promoted all these things." So she does that in open court. It's videotaped. It's shown all over the country. And they say, "Okay, that's cool. We're going to give you 5 years probation and a $5,000 fine or something like that. And, you can go home free. You're a free person." Now, she has raised, by the way, $14 million in online donations. So she goes back to her online presence, to her social media, and posts that Fani Willis, quote, extorted her guilty plea. Now, when she had been asked in open court, she was asked if anybody has, quote, forced, threatened, or promised you anything in exchange for a guilty plea. She said, other than what is recited in the documents, no. So what's the deal here, Jenna Ellis? Because, I mean, she's really, I realize $14 million is a lot of money. If I had something going on where I could raise $14 million online in the course of less than a year, well, maybe it's been a couple of years, but in 2 or 3 years even, if I had a gig going where I could raise $14 million online, I'd be reluctant to blow it up.
On the other hand, I also might be inclined to just kind of take the money and run. But, you know, maybe she burned through it all. Maybe she's been living high. Maybe her lawyers are a lot more expensive than normal. I don't know. I don't get it. But it's starting to look like possibly the reason that she got off here was not so much that they considered her testimony to be wonderful or whatever, but that, you know, hey, she's a lawyer. Let's cut the lawyers some slack. I mean, I realize that's kind of a conspiracy theory, but this is the speculation. Excuse me, I'm sneezing here. That Schuleman is posting over on Daily Kos was, she's claiming that the deal was extorted. Is this, and yet they're letting her off. Is this because she's a lawyer? Is this just a professional courtesy that the lawyers in the Justice Department and the lawyers in Fani Willis's office are extending to the lawyers, who were working for Donald Trump? I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting theory. There's probably a lot of factors that go into this. Frankly, I have a little more trust in Fani Willis's ethics and frankly, courage than that. But, we'll see. There's also the question of, what are the other, shoes that are going to drop? We've got now 4 of the 19 who have been indicted. You've got, the one guy who's just a random phony elector. And then you've got, 3 people who are pretty substantial names. And we still have yet to hear from Mark Meadows, what's going on with Mark Meadows down in Georgia. And the simple reality is the Georgia indictments represent a much greater threat in many ways to many of these Republicans than do the federal indictments. Because number one, if you get sent to a Georgia prison, they genuinely are hellholes. Number two, a Republican president cannot pardon people for crimes committed in the state of Georgia, including himself. And number three, Fani Willis is, she's like a dog with a bone. I mean, she is, I probably shouldn't use dog metaphors. I get in trouble about that, but she is tenacious. This is a woman who is hanging on. And she sent teachers to prison, right, for a conspiracy to rig grades. There are teachers in prison right now because of Fani Willis. She is one tough woman.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I would not be messing with her if I was Jenna Ellis. But, we'll probably find out tomorrow or the next day. Stay tuned. I'll be right back with your calls.
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding 2 forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested. Special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the club habit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status. Fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive-sum, but identity conflict is zero-sum. The book Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at tom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. My apologies. Somehow I got Jenna Ellis stuck in my head, and my whole rant there in the last 5 minutes of the last half hour, I kept saying Jenna Ellis, and I meant Sidney Powell. I'm mixing up the blonde lawyers who work for Donald Trump, I guess. Maybe they're not all blondes even. But in any case, I'm mixing up my Trump lawyers, and my apologies. I work really hard to try to make sure that everything I say on this program is something that you can take to the bank. And I blew it. So it's Sidney Powell who is coming out and saying, oh, no, I was coerced, and I was quack, 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 quack. Anyhow, all that said, let's pick up your calls here. Beachside Bill in Orlando, Florida. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Tom. Thanks for taking my call again.
Sure.
Nice to talk to you again. You mentioned DeSantis and drag queens earlier. I caught that, and I can give you an update here in Florida.
Okay.
Representative Randy Fine, Florida House 33. That's is in Melbourne Beach, Florida, just south of me here. Mm-hmm. His fingerprints are all over the drag queen and the trans kid. You know, mm-hmm. His fingerprints, and he's in line. He was in line with DeSantis until last week or a couple days ago. Well, outside of an event last week, Randy Fine was accosted by a Nazi sympathizer, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And what happened was it scared him. And so DeSantis didn't say anything. And there's another thing about Fine wanting to become a college president. DeSantis disowned him. He just didn't say anything to support him. So finally, yesterday the news came out that Randy Fine is voting for Trump instead. He's disregarding DeSantis altogether, which forbears the Florida House and Senate coming up, the legislature in January. If Randy Fine jumps ship against DeSantis, this is his political obituary, basically for me, because I think they're going to be jumping ship for these laws that they passed this year. You know what I mean? Yeah. All of them all voted in line. Now they're jumping ship. What do you think?
I don't know that much about your local Florida politics there, Bill. I mean, you're the expert on it. You live there.
Yeah.
But it makes sense to me. I've heard Fine's name before. Wasn't he one of the real hardcore right-wing firebrands in the Florida legislature?
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. He was the one. I call him a bloated bigot. He really is just really evil. But he's with Jews. He's Jewish, and he went to Israel last year, I think, with DeSantis, and DeSantis signed this religious, covering up for religion covering up for their atrocity, or there's some religious bill. And yes, he is a very, very deep in the Republican legislature here. It raises a lot of money for him. He's very, very. After this defect here, it's a defect towards Trump, and I think most of them will now. And so they're going to regret their voting this year. That's my point. And it's going to be interesting, like I say, in January when the legislature meets, because they're all going to be, defeating, so to speak, I guess, whatever you want to call it. Right. They're scared. In other words, I think they're going to be scared this year.
I agree. And I have a feeling by that time that Ron DeSantis isn't going to be the leading candidate. I think it's probably going to be Nikki Haley.
Yeah, pretty much so. If not Trump, I agree with you there, because DeSantis he's lost it. Whatever he had I think is gone. His obituary, I think, is for the future. I think is even written. When
they start making fun of you for wearing lifts in your shoes and stuff like that, I mean, it's over. He's toast. Bill, thanks for the call, and thanks for the update. I appreciate it. Dan in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm sorry I wasn't able to listen while I was on hold, so I may be jumping back a bit.
It's quite all right. My apologies for our music on hold system not working.
That's right. But at the end of the first segment, you were talking about Mark Meadows' book. And I'm wondering if you think it would be appropriate for the publisher and the retailers to take it off the shelf if it's been verified that it's just parts of it are just totally untrue.
What I've read so far is this assertion, this broad kind of general assertion that there are claims in the book that are more or less supportive of Trump that contradict things that he told the prosecutors. But I have not seen any specifics. And so I would withhold a call for that until the specifics come out. But I suspect when the specifics do come out, it's going to be a bit of a scandal. And you know, that probably would be the appropriate response, would be to pull the book.
Okay, well, that's what I was thinking, so we'll wait and find out.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Dan, thanks for the call. Scott in Oakland, California, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. So I'm calling about the earlier caller that hold on. I need to mute this because I couldn't hear you on the.
That's quite all right. I understand, Scott. Go for it.
Okay. So you had a caller earlier about the redistricting. What was it, North Carolina? Mm-hmm. And I think the battle for the next 2 cycles is going to be this redistricting because, you know, everyone should understand redistricting is because redistricting by Republicans happens because they can't compete on an even playing field.
Right.
We all know
it's a way of rigging the game.
That needs to be implanted in everybody's head. Anytime you hear a redistricting battle, you have to understand one side is trying to cheat. Okay,
right? It's rigging the vote.
That really needs to.
Yeah.
That really needs to be hammered into everybody's head. So anyway, one of my personal heroes is Mark Elias for the battles that he's fighting. He's just in the trenches every single day.
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
I agree.
And his operation is called Democracy Docket.
Yep. No, I've asked Sean several times to try and get him on every week to give us an update, and he just doesn't seem to respond to our requests. But anyhow, keep going, Scott.
Anyway, so if you go to Democracy Docket, you can get on their newsletter. You can hear updates daily on what's happening and also give money. So it's democracydocket.com, and that's really why all I call for. But one more point about redistricting. California went to a nonpartisan redistricting, and the Democrats, you know, just took over, and California is the fourth economy in the world, leading on energy efficiency, leading on climate initiative, employment rights, you know, on and on and on.
Right.
So redistricting fights are where it's at for the next at least 2 or 3 cycles.
Which raises kind of a moral question. I mean, California went with a citizens commission that proposes districts that are nonpartisan. If they were to gerrymander California the way that the Republicans are gerrymandering North Carolina right now, they could add, some estimates suggest it could be as high as 6 or 7 more Democrats to the House of Representatives because California is so populous. You know, but they, you know, basically voluntarily declared a truce. You know, the Democrats in California. It's not just California, by the way. There's other states
and compete on the issues.
I know.
Compete on the issues.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm thinking that until gerrymandering is outlawed, and Democrats have tried to do that. I mean, that was part of the For the People Act, was outlawing gerrymandering. That you know would have passed the Senate had it not been for Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Kyrsten Sinema, by the way, according to press reports, is thinking about not running for re-election because she's convinced that she can make big bucks working as a lobbyist or as a president of a university or something like that. You know, there's life after the Senate, right?
Yes. One more point about California. We make our own insulin.
Oh, you make your own insulin in California?
Yes.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, and at a low cost.
I mean, what are people thinking when they vote for a Republican? What are they thinking?
You know, they're thinking that they hate gay people and they hate black people. I mean, that's mostly what they're thinking. It really just boils down to that, you know, or they hate people who aren't, you know, fundamentalist Christians. It's all about the hate for the Republican Party. This is basically all they have to sell. You know, hate teachers, hate unions, hate queer people, hate, you know, it's all about the hate. Scott, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Wayne in Redding, California. Hey, Wayne, thanks for listening to KFOI. What's on your mind today?
I am actually calling to follow up on the gentleman who called from North Carolina about what's happened there with their gerrymandering and so on.
Right, they're voting on it today.
ProPublica has been had an investigative series on the architect of basically the conservative legal restructuring of our legal system, Leonard Leo, which is not a name that most people know about. But he's responsible for backing our current candidate for Speaker of the House, along with obviously the conservative majority in the Supreme Court.
Yep.
And Wisconsin.
He also controls over $1 billion. He's going to be the guy who replaces Charles Koch when Charles kicks the bucket.
Yeah. So the thing about Leonard Leo is, if we have a candidate for, the Machiavelli Prize, I think he would definitely be right up there with Henry Kissinger.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I encourage people to check out the ProPublica investigative journalism on this guy, because he really, pretty much everything that he has been pushing for a long time is what's causing us problems today.
Yeah, and ProPublica.org is the website, ProPublica, and you're absolutely right. They have done some really extraordinary reporting. I mean, they're also the guys who broke the story about the right-wing billionaires, Clarence Thomas's patron, Harlan Crow, as well as Paul Singer. These two right-wing billionaires just, grooming Supreme Court justices. And now you've got Clarence Thomas is going to, in this, is it Harper v. Moore or Moore v. U.S. or Moore v. Virginia? I forget which one it is. But one of these cases that involves a Moore is going to be heard by the Supreme Court any day now. And it's going to determine whether or not Congress can pass a wealth tax on billionaires. And you've got two members of that we know of for sure of the U.S. Supreme Court who have been groomed for years and years by these same right-wing billionaires who are helping fund this lawsuit and who will benefit tremendously from this lawsuit, from this, from the Supreme Court decision going their way. And they're refusing, Alito and Thomas are refusing to recuse themselves. Oh, no, we're going to vote for our billionaire buddies. After all, they gave us 30-some-odd free flights and a dozen free, multi-million-dollar cruises. And, why would we not vote for our friends? It's absurd, obscene, it's beyond the pale. Wayne, thanks for the call. Thank you very much. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Meanwhile, the House is getting ready to vote on, whether this guy who wants to have a nationwide abortion ban should be Speaker of the House. Stay with us. And welcome back. Roya in Los Angeles. Hey, Roya, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I don't know, Tom. I was just thinking about this. It feels like this hashtag Free Palestine stuff. It's just like the same crap as Let's Go Brandon. It's like, I don't know, everyone's jumps on the bandwagon. Everyone's a follower. Ooh, Free Palestine. Now that's the thing to it's like, if you're on Instagram or Facebook, first of all, it's like, they're like, oh, we're going to boycott everything Jewish. Then get off Instagram and Facebook. I don't know. It's just so upsetting to me that everyone is becoming a bully. Remember, Tom, when the kids were getting picked on when they didn't want to be Trump, or their family wasn't a Trump supporter, but they were in these red states and they were getting bullied. Oh, you don't like Trump? It's I feel like it's the same kind of everyone's turning into this bullying of they don't even know Joe Snow White from Colorado Springs. He doesn't know diddly about the Palestinian and the Israeli complex situation that's been going on forever. Okay, so it's what are you talking about, Free Palestine? You don't know anything other than you're just jumping on another bandwagon and being a follower. What do you think about that?
I think you're right to a large extent, Roya. This conflict in the Middle East has provided anti-Semites all over the world. And particularly what is looking like an Israeli overreaction is providing anti-Semites around the world with lots and lots of ammunition. And it's one of the reasons why you've got President Biden going to Israel during a war. You know, we really have to, I mean, he's the first American president in history to go into a war zone, and he's done it twice now. He did it in Ukraine, too.
Listen, he's doing an amazing job.
And you know, and it's why he's telling the Israelis, you know, temper your response. Don't make the stupid mistake that we made, that George Bush made, of overreacting and then having the whole world turn against you. And it looks like Netanyahu's going to do it anyway. In fact, he's already well into it. I mean, we've got over 5,000 Gazan casualties, and cutting off power and water is a clear war crime. I mean, you just can't do that. You can't punish general populations for what their governments or their military or the crackpots among them do legally.
The thing is, it's like those miles of tunnels underneath are actual bomb shelters. They have electricity, fuel, food, they have everything. But they wouldn't allow the civilians to go down there.
Nope,
so
it's Hamas
it's
only.
like, you know, Hamas is like so, but that's the thing. It's like, they started this massacre, to cut off a guy's head with a shovel in front of his children and cut off the woman's breasts in front of, like that, you know what it was. You know,
no, it was an intentional provocation. They knew, just like Bin Laden knew, that if they could provoke the in this case the Prime Minister of Israel, in our case it was the President of the United States, if they can provoke them to an overreaction, then they win.
I'm just trying to think, let's say if you had a group of people from Mexico coming over in San Diego across the border at 6:30 in the morning and rape and do the same thing that they did over there. How would the U.S. would react to that?
Well, the big difference is that the government of Mexico is not controlled by the people who would be sending the rapists and killers into the United States.
I know.
Whereas Gaza is.
I'm just thinking, you know.
So it's hard to come up with any analogy because this is a pretty unique situation. Roya, thank you for the call.
Right.
I share your concerns. Yeah, good talking to you. And your point about bullies, I mean, being a bully is literally intrinsic to being a right-winger. They come out of the same worldview, the same emotional mold. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. When I was a little kid, my grandmother had a piano, and I loved to play it. I was incompetent, but I was figuring out all kinds of stuff. And then I kind of got away from it and, went to school and things got busy and just lost track of it. Well, now there's this fascinating new study out of the University of Geneva, Switzerland, that is making me think maybe I should go back and learn the piano. What they found was that they took a group of 132 healthy older adults, retired, 62 to 78 years old. Half of them learned the piano, half of them took music classes without learning the piano. And what they found was that those who learned the piano actually had the strongest increase in their memory, in their mental competence, their mental faculties. Those who took the music classes also did well, but learning the piano was a huge step. So check it out. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 52 minutes past the hour, and welcome back. Laura in Troy, Missouri. Hey, Laura, I see that it has on here, it says you're calling about Jenna Ellis. I don't know if you caught my mea culpa, but when I went off on my Jenna Ellis rant, I was actually talking about Sidney Powell, and I got it wrong. It was my fault. And my apologies. So if you need to recalibrate, go for it. What's up, Laura?
The whole Jenna Ellis thing, if I'm remembering right, back in March, Colorado had censured her for making false statements about the election. Mm-hmm. And if I'm remembering right, I think afterwards she went right out and started saying the same lies again. So that's what I was, I thought you were talking about her, but you were talking about Sidney Powell.
I had it wrong, but it was Sidney Powell who's doing this. But apparently Jenna Ellis is, well, who knows?
They're all crazy, right?
Yeah, because,
I just mix them up in my head. It's really unfortunate when I do that, and I do it very rarely. I think the last time I did this was more than a year ago, but it's embarrassing. Anyway.
Oh no.
Yeah. So you're in Missouri, so that's close to Colorado, I guess. You've been paying attention to this.
Yeah.
So
kind of. It's a red state, so there's a lot of crazy stuff going on here.
Yeah. Well, good luck. Laura, thank you for the call, and my apologies for mixing up the names. Ann in Atascadero, California. Hey, Ann, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, some observations about why Jenna Ellis might go on social media. I bet she already
it was actually Sidney
Powell
Powell who did that. My apologies.
Okay. Yeah.
Same situation.
Yeah, because okay. But the same situation is she's already getting death threats and doxing, and she's trying to cover herself, so to speak.
Yeah, both of them are actually right now.
Yeah, and I would think that being a witness, one of the things you're instructed to do is not to talk to people about what you might be testifying. I don't know. So I'm surprised that they're going to hit social media and talk up the case one way or another.
Well, and what Sidney Powell said was that she was coerced. I mean, that's pretty strong stuff. I mean, to say that, it's baffling to me.
Yeah, and she's a wild card. She's not somebody that is like playing conservative, whatever she's doing.
Yeah.
She's possibly, has some mental health issues, but I don't know that.
No, that's Sidney Powell. So, Jenna Ellis you're right. She was publicly censured in March by state authorities, and she admitted that multiple statements she made on Trump's behalf were misrepresentations. In August, she was named as one of 19 criminal defendants in Georgia. She agreed to be sentenced. Her plea appears to trigger, at minimum, a review by Colorado Attorney Regulation Counsel Jessica Yates, who investigates allegations of lawyer misconduct. So, this could cause her to lose her license in Colorado.
Yeah.
That's interesting. She's the third Trump attorney to plead guilty behind Powell and Cheeseborough.
Yeah. Well, she can get on the upcoming show that it'll be called Trump's Cast of Characters of some kind, where they have game shows and they'll make money that way.
I can see it now. But Bob Barker has passed away, but I'm sure they'll find a good imitation, or maybe a Vanna White, who can. Here's what you will win if you believe one of these lies. It's incredible.
Crimes and felonies for 100, please.
There you go. Exactly. Ann, thank you. Thanks for the call, and thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. It's nice to hear from you. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. It is, we're hitting the top of the hour here. America has mysteriously hit a deadly climate tipping point. No one knows why. I'll share that with you after the break. Also, the Republicans are nominating right now their crazy guy who wants to have a nationwide abortion ban.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, I mean, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air, end quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book, Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome to the second hour of our program. My op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is about a really troubling issue right now, which is climate change. We're seeing this on vivid display, and frankly, I suspect that there will be a lot of news reports about this tomorrow. And that is what happened in Acapulco. Acapulco is, a Mexican resort city, and there was a tropical storm heading their way with winds of 50 miles an hour, and they thought everything was going to be good. Acapulco has not been hit by a hurricane above Category 2 ever in recorded history. And this storm, which last night when people went to bed, they were expecting 50, 60 mile an hour winds, and they went to sleep. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, a Category 5 hurricane with 165 mile an hour winds hit Acapulco. And we have no reports out of that city. Apparently, nobody has been able to get, the output of a camera to a satellite phone, for example. They have no power. They have no internet. They presumably have no water, no services of any kind. And they just got hit with a Category 5 hurricane. This is completely unprecedented. We are starting to see these massive tipping points, these massive changes. I reproduced in my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com a graphic from a new study that has just been published that is absolutely shocking, showing that the Antarctic sea ice is off the scale. By off the scale, I mean we're seeing changes for this year, 2023, that are not reflected by any year in previous history. They are so radical. Global sea ice is down. North Atlantic ocean surface temperatures up. World ocean surface temperatures up. World surface land temperatures up. The cumulative area burned of forests exploding. Now, nobody's sure exactly why. Just in the last 12 months, we've seen this explosion, this rapid transition into a new climate state. But the best guess, it's fairly obvious, the best guess is that we have passed some kind of a climate tipping point. Something has happened within our climate system that has shifted it from its old relatively stable state to its new, hopefully relatively stable state, but it's looking like this actually may be not a new state. This may be a transition point into a new state as long as we continue burning fossil fuels, which we will almost certainly continue to do for at least another decade. But they're trying to figure out, what made this huge change this year. One theory is that it has to do with the Atlantic Ocean changing temperature, which changes the ability of the winds above the ocean to hold dirt from North Africa. dirt that could either hold in heat or could reflect heat back into outer space. So there's one theory that it has to do with dust concentrations in the atmosphere. Another theory is that the January 2022 eruption of the volcano at Hunga this was a year and a half ago, injected 146 million tons of water vapor and 420,000 tons of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. And that those are greenhouse gases, and they keep heat trapped more efficiently. And so there's another theory that this might be what we might be looking at might just be a 1 or 2 year anomaly based on a volcanic explosion. Some scientists argue that it was caused by a change in worldwide regulations mandating that ships burn diesel fuel that doesn't have high levels of particulate emission. There's so many ships on the oceans, moving so much cargo all around the world that all of the pollution from those ships was actually blocking out some of the sunlight and keeping some of the heat from hitting the earth. And now it's been 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I'm not sure how long, but it's been, in the last decade, that worldwide, the world has gotten together and said, no, we're going to, you're going to require you to burn diesel fuel that is not the old cheap, kind of poisonous diesel fuel, but the newer, cleaner diesel fuel. And the result of that is that these fine particles that reflect the sun back out are no longer being put into the atmosphere. And so the atmosphere is transmitting heat more efficiently from, the stratosphere or from outer space, from the sun, down to the surface of the earth. And that increase in efficiency is responsible for this dramatic increase that we've seen in the last 12 months, more or less. And of course, there's the El Nino. We've gone from a La Nina year a couple of years ago to an El Nino this year, and that the El Nino typically brings more heat out of the ocean and up to the surface where it can then transfer into the atmosphere. Nobody's really sure exactly which of these might be what is causing this problem, or if it's something else altogether. But it is such a huge anomaly that this article that was published in the peer-reviewed journal, science journal Bioscience, opens with this quote. This is how these scientists open their article in a peer-reviewed science publication, Bioscience. Quote, "Life on planet Earth is under siege. We are now in an uncharted territory. For several decades, scientists have consistently warned of a future marked by extreme climatic conditions because of escalating global temperatures caused by ongoing human activities that release harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Unfortunately," they write, "time is up. We are seeing the manifestation of those predictions as an alarming and unprecedented succession of climate records are broken, causing profoundly distressing scenes of suffering to unfold. We are entering an unfamiliar domain regarding our climate crisis, a situation no one has ever witnessed firsthand in the history of humankind." End quote. They look at 35 different vital signs, they call them, that signal the health of our planet, and they found that 20 out of these 35, markers of planetary health are off the scale in the wrong place. They've just broken the mold. While wind and solar power grew 17% between 2021 and 2022, both are now cheaper than unsubsidized fossil fuels. Nonetheless, we are burning fossil fuels, or we're producing electricity with fossil fuels, at a 15-to-1 ratio versus the electricity that we are producing with renewable sources. Life on Earth is not going to be safe until we reverse those numbers. Now, we're moving in the right direction, but, we've got a ways to go because, and you can track an awful lot of this back to the Reagan and Thatcher administrations in the 70s and 80s. It was in the 1970s that scientists first started really seriously ringing the alarm bells about climate change, about global warming. It was in the 70s and 80s that the scientists at the big fossil fuel companies, at Shell and at ExxonMobil and some of these other companies, came to a clear understanding that their products were warming the earth and that this would have dire consequences for future generations. and then chose to cover it up and spend money to deny the science that they themselves had learned. If we had been making the transitions to renewable energy that we're making right now, if our automakers had been making electric cars like we are making right now, if we had been doing that back in the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was denying climate change, and Republicans continue to this day to deny climate change, if we had made these changes 40 years ago, we would have led the world. And the entire world would be in a very different place right now. And we wouldn't be looking at Acapulco being wiped out. And we wouldn't be looking at massive levels of forest fires and wildfires and floods and derecos and all the other things that climate change has brought us. But because a handful of fossil fuel executives and wealthy people in the Republican Party and American right-wing billionaires decided that the money that they were making from fossil fuels was more important than the planet on which we all live, we're here. All over the planet, glaciers are in retreat. Sea ice shelves and glaciers covering Greenland and Antarctica are melting. Coral reefs are bleaching and dying. Fish and marine mammal species are undergoing radical changes in their habitat. The ambulatory animals, coral can't move. It's an animal, but it can't move. But fish can move, and they are. They're moving toward the poles. They're moving away from the equatorial regions because the water's just gotten too hot for them. We've got, and all this wild weather, severe damaging hail, tornadoes in areas that have never seen them before. We had a tornado over downtown Portland last week. We don't get tornadoes first of all, you typically don't get tornadoes in cities, but secondly, we've never had a tornado in Portland, at least not to the best of my knowledge. The weather people were shocked. There was a tornado, now it didn't touch down, so it wasn't like, big news because it didn't do a lot of damage, but it was a tornado. You're not supposed to have those things here. Bomb cyclones. When did you first learn of bomb cyclones? I first learned of the phrase bomb cyclones when Louise and I were living in D.C. Because D.C. was getting these bomb cyclones where in the winter, where literally Arctic air masses would drool down over North America and sock us. We lived on a boat in D.C. at the Capitol Yacht Club, and our boat was frozen in. We had, us and all the other boats around us, they were putting these things called ice cutters in the water. They're just like fans, little electric propellers that continuously move the water so that the ice wouldn't freeze and damage the hulls of the boats. This is not supposed to happen. I mean, occasionally you get bad winters in D.C., but this was like, from normal to 30 below, just that fast, or however cold it was. It was very, very cold. And I can tell you, 46-foot 1986 Chris Craft Constellation boats are not well insulated. We were living in a fiberglass boat with no insulation. We had a $700 electric bill that month. It was amazing, just running the heaters in the little boat. This is not how it's supposed to be. We need to wake the hell up and do something about this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Stay with us. And welcome back. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind today?
Well, I was wondering about when the conflict, when did Palestine or the Jewish people, Israel, began to expel the Palestinians from their land for what they considered their country. And I think it was quite a long while ago.
It was in 1947. And it wasn't,
and
it wasn't the
also-
Israelis who were expelling them. It was the United Nations, and by and large, they weren't so much expelled as their land was. Most of the people who were living there at the time were compensated.
Compensated, but that didn't take the place of being able.
I totally get it, Joan. Totally understand.
And I heard a program yesterday, and I'm not going to tell you where I did. It's somebody I have very good confidence in, who had said that over the years that the Israelis have had conflicts over several countries, including bombings, over in their area, but none of that news I ever remember was received in this country. We didn't have any idea. We were pretty dumb, I think, about the conflict that was going on over there.
Oh, that's not true,
That came
Joan.
to where it is right now.
Yeah.
And I think
conflict in the Middle East is well reported in the United States and in the West.
Well, not what.
And Israel is an open democracy with a free press. You can read the opposition press. I mean, Haaretz is the liberal newspaper in Israel, and you can read it anywhere in the world online.
Well, I would like to have seen that, but what they had talked about, I never saw in the news, and I do believe, and I respect both groups, but I believe that Hamas was only started in order to have a group to fight for the. I don't think the things they've done are okay, but I don't think that the things that Israel has done are okay. And what amazed me the most was the instantaneous involvement of the United States in one visit on the TV by President Biden, whom I totally respected up until this moment, said that we were going to be sending artillery and everything over to Israel. And I don't think joining the war or being part of a war and being part of killing people on both sides, I think this is
He's sending over anti-aircraft rockets. You realize that that Hamas is still sending. They just had a missile attack on Tel Aviv this morning, trying to kill innocent civilians.
Well,
we're sending over anti-missile rockets. We're sending over anti-missile devices that will knock those missiles out of the air.
Military manufacturers have a great time because they make a lot of money when there's a war.
Yeah, they do,
on
but it's perfectly legal.
And
they're selling a
over,
product that there's a demand for.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry that there's a demand for it, but it's a demand that could go without being.
So should we not send anything to Israel so that Hamas can blow up some more civilians in Tel Aviv?
My understanding is Israel is one of the most richest countries, has more money backing them than anybody. And why are we?
It is a wealthy country.
Their own country.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I get that argument. Joan, thank you. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Are you feeling exhausted by Donald Trump? So many Americans are. And not Donald Trump, not just Donald Trump. The entire GOP. We've got this war on trans people. We've got a war on queer people. We've got a war on people of color, a war on voting. Young people concerned about climate change, and Republicans not only refusing to do anything about it, but like Marjorie Taylor Greene out there talking about how, oh, well, it's just normal variation, it's nothing to worry about. Just keep on shoveling that coal. People cutting pills in half because they can't afford their medicine. Parents who don't have enough money to properly dress their kids for school, even though they're working full-time. Seniors fearing that the Republican Party is going to finally succeed in killing off Social Security and Medicare. They're trying it again. It's this whole, yes, we'll raise the debt ceiling as part of cut Social Security. It's nuts. I got a whole op-ed about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 24 minutes past the hour, and Israel has just come under attack from Syria now. Earlier today, or maybe late last night, Tel Aviv was under attack from Hamas, from Gaza. They were throwing more rockets at Tel Aviv, and now you've got Syria, another country on Israel's eastern border that is throwing rockets fired toward the Golan Heights. Syrian media reported that the strikes targeted southern Syria's Daara region. This is, IDF fighting back, sending back rockets and mortars basically into the region. Sirens sounded in the towns of Net Golan, Bnei Yehuda, and Givat Yoav to the east of Lake Kinneret last night, Tuesday evening. And and the IDF is also striking terror cells in Lebanon. Those stories, Syria, Lebanon, and of course Gaza, this whole thing is running the risk of turning into a major regional conflict as opposed to just Israel and Hamas. And that, that could be very, very dangerous. Very dangerous. And, as I said, we've got this unprecedented Category 5 hurricane hitting Florida right now. This is pretty grim stuff too, because, well, actually, on Tuesday evening, there was no hurricane or Otis, writes Mark Sumner over on Daily Kos. There was just a tropical storm carrying winds of about 50 miles an hour. Every single model used to predict the behavior of such storms called for Otis to remain a tropical storm. Instead, Mark Sumner writes, it blew up over a period of just 9 hours, becoming a raging Category 5 hurricane that struck the coast of Mexico just south of Acapulco overnight with sustained winds of 165 miles an hour. This is the most powerful storm in this region going back more than 50 years. The last severe storm to strike along this coast was in 1968, and that was a Category 2. That's the worst it's ever gotten. Over 1 million people facing a nightmare scenario. And like I said, we're not hearing anything about it in our media because there is no media coming out of Acapulco right now. There are no press reports. That's why I said, tomorrow we're going to be seeing the devastation. It's going to be massive. I'll pick up your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truth, the fossil fuel industry would really rather you didn't know all about. I'll be right back with you. Our book today is My Life in the Black Party. The title is just another N-word, and it's by Field Marshal Don Cox, his life in the Black Panther Party. This is from Chapter 5, page 47. The chapter is titled, Use What You Got to Get What You Need. Before we entered into a direct relationship with the Panthers, our group had wanted to prove our worthiness by our actions. Since that was no longer in question, contact was made and a rendezvous fixed to meet at Huey's Pad on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland. I don't remember much about that first gathering, other than meeting David Hilliard, the Panther Party's chief of staff, for the first time. The only thing that stands out in my memory is a question from Huey as we were sipping coffee. He asked if I didn't think it better to be properly equipped before going into action. He suggested it was best to first rip off the necessary funds to get everything we needed in advance of launching a major effort. I had practically memorized his essay, The Correct Handling of a Revolution, in which he spoke of teaching by example. And so I blurted out the first thing that came to mind, which was, use what you got to get what you need. After a long, hot summer of 1967, with the rebellions in Newark, Detroit, and elsewhere, we felt that our preparations had, at least, put us on the same level as the rest of the country, and that the revolution would not pass us by. Our San Francisco group started attending and participating in any and all functions relevant to black people. And we tried to let everyone in our area, and we tried to get to know everyone in our area associated with the struggle.
We also continued our community meetings. News of the death of Che Guevara in October of that year had us walking around in a stupor for a while, and although that came as a severe blow to the international struggle for freedom and justice of all people, we were proud to be among those who had responded to his battle cry and had picked up the fallen arms. Huey asked if we would conduct a meeting on Hunters Point for him. He was supposed to go, but something had come up and he couldn't make it. We were honored that he thought enough of us to ask, and we were more than enthusiastic to do whatever he wanted. It was at that meeting that we had a new, surprising experience. We met our first resistance in the form of Adam Rogers. He was supposed to have been the biggest, baddest N-word on Hunters Point, but when we encountered him, he came across like an Uncle Tom. He seemed to be impressed with our firearms demonstration, but he was violently against the idea of black people arming themselves for self-defense. He was convinced that would increase repression, even though history proved him wrong. When we examined the history of repression of black people, the only time there was significant decline in police violence and murders perpetrated against blacks was precisely the period when blacks were organized and had access to guns. Given the wave of terror and violence against blacks that continues to sweep the country, I truly believe there is a lesson to be learned from that fact. Rogers was one of the wounded in the Hunters Point Rebellion of the year before, and a photograph of him had been used by the news media to illustrate articles on the riots that broke out following the killing of a black teenager by police that September. Because of that, we were even more surprised by his reaction. It was not until later that we discovered that the administration of San Francisco Mayor Joseph Alito had sent in money after the rebellion and had bought off the so-called bad N-words. The same technique was used from coast to coast. Despite Rogers, most everyone seemed to like what we had to say and really related to the firearms demonstration. Several people wanted to take courses in handling weapons, and so I fixed a rendezvous for the following Saturday at the parking lot of the abandoned shopping center right on top of Hunters Point. The next day I arrived at the point at 7 in the morning in order to get set up before people began to gather. There wasn't going to be any target practice, but I would be firing a few shots in the air by way of demonstration. I knew that would pose no problem as far as the police were concerned. Due to their racism, whenever they heard shots on the point, they generally looked the other way. Once, during a dispute between two gangs, shooting broke out, and instead of police coming in to break it up, they sealed off the area and let them shoot it out. The gun battle lasted 24 hours, and the police didn't return until the next day. At around 8 o'clock, I saw David Hilliard's car driving up, which I found surprising because we had only seen each other a couple of times before. As the car approached, I recognized Emory Douglas and George Murray. Everyone had strange looks on their faces that made it clear that something was wrong. Damn, Huey had been shot and captured. He had shown up at David's wounded and bleeding heavily. There was real concern for his life, so David drove him to the hospital and left him on the steps, then drove straight to San Francisco to find me. He said Huey had asked him to ask me to help out in the aftermath, specifically dealing with the passenger who had been in Huey's car at the time of the shootout with Officer John Frey of the Oakland Police, who'd been killed. There was also the problem of the guns Huey had stockpiled. I'll never understand why David didn't just bring the guns with him, but he hadn't, and I was obliged to go back into the area, get everything, and get back out safely. That might sound easy, but the shootout had occurred less than 3 hours before, and there was one policeman dead and one seriously wounded, so it was hot over in Oakland, to say the least. There was no time to go by the house and unload the guns I had on hand for the training, so I followed David back to Oakland with a trunk full of weapons. David took me into the backyard of a house that had a lot of weeds and a stack of old lumber in which he had stashed the gun. In his state of excitement, he couldn't remember exactly where the pistol was, and while we were looking, an elderly black woman came out of the house next door and asked what we were doing. David kept searching and didn't look up. She then said, "If you don't come out of there, I'm going to call the police." I began to panic and told David to say something to the woman. When he rose up, she recognized him and calmed down. This was David's house, and she was his neighbor. On the one hand, I was relieved, but on the other, if the police were looking for the passenger who'd been with Huey, it was certain they wouldn't miss David's house, as both were known Panthers. Finally, he found the gun, and it continues from there.
Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at HartmanReport.com. Check it out. So when was the last time you heard some Republican ranting about how, like Ron DeSantis, Florida's where woke goes to die, and we're declaring war on woke, and all that kind of. Republicans have been using dog whistles for most of my lifetime to shout out to their generally white racist base against various minority groups. Richard Nixon was, we're law and order, and as John Ehrlichman pointed out, his whole war on drugs was basically a war on black people and hippies. George Herbert Walker Bush had Willie Horton. George W. Bush had the Muslims. Donald Trump, it's the Mexican rapists. It just never ends. Woke is just the latest dog whistle they've got. So the next time somebody uses that phrase, just, ask them, what are you talking about here? Are you just trying to tell me that you're a bigot? I mean, what are you really saying? There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back, 35 minutes past the hour. Doug in Spring Hill, Florida. Hey, Doug, what's on your mind today? Doug? Okay, I'm going to put Doug on hold here. Here's the deal. The music on hold system for our, or whatever you call those things, for our phone lines doesn't work. So when you get put on hold, you just hear silence. So please do two things when you call in. One, put your phone on speaker. You can even talk to me on speaker. Just put the microphone up by your mouth and nobody will know the difference, right? So put your phone on speaker so you can hear when I put you on the air. You'll hear a whoosh like that. And then secondly, leave your radio on so you can hear what's going on as we're talking. So that said, let's try this again. Doug in Spring Hill, Florida. Hey, Doug, can you hear me now? Oh, Doug is still listening to the radio. All right, Sean in Chicago. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to call and unfortunately criticize your coverage of the Palestinian conflict. I think you don't have like a really firm understanding of the history of the conflict, and it kind of pains me sometimes because when people call and try to inform you on why there's 2 million people essentially living in an open air prison, you kind of sometimes dismiss them and say that now is not the time.
Sean, I'm not saying now is not the time, and thanks a lot for your critique. I suppose I say that sarcastically. Bill, I'm just going to move along. Bill in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm always glad to hear you. You're great for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
And I got a 1996 movie, The Arrival. Mm-hmm. The plot was some interstellar invaders were terraforming the Earth to make it better for them. And one of the scientists was talking to them, and the invader says to the scientist, "You guys are destroying this planet, and if you don't take care of it, you don't deserve to live here." That was a 1996 quote, and that just rings true today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is humanity. I mean, it's very unfortunate, but this is very much the state of the game right now. Is that because, as I said earlier, because a group of fossil fuel billionaires and multimillionaires decided that they wanted to milk a few more $1 billion out of their industry, they decided to put planet Earth at risk, and we're all paying the price for it.
And the Bible says God gave us the earth, and we're supposed to husband it. Yeah. It rings so true. If we don't take care of it, we don't deserve to live here.
Yeah, I'm with you. Bill, well, actually, I would say what we need to do is we need to hold to account the people who lied to us and who paid to, who bribed our politicians and who paid for lies about climate change. We very much need to be holding these people to account. Bill, thank you for the call. Ron in Chicago. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I've been a pro-labor Democrat for about 60 years now, and now I'm a climate change Democrat. Mm-hmm. But one thing I don't understand is why the Democrats hate Elon Musk so much. If it weren't for Elon Musk, we'd still be back with Prius and Leaf for electric cars.
Why do you say that? Elon Musk didn't invent anything. He bought Tesla from the guys who started it, and it was a going and growing enterprise. Had he not bought it, it would still be Tesla.
If he had not bought it, it wouldn't exist now because they needed money and they needed his money.
Well, no, they decided. These guys decided to cash out. They were getting plenty of federal money, actually. They cashed out. The company wasn't in trouble when Musk bought it. He just made a good investment. That's all.
How many electric cars have they made when he invested in it?
I don't know. I don't know. And they've, and they've done really well. And if he played a role in growing Tesla, and I'm sure he did, good on him. But to say that Democrats should bow down to Elon Musk, the guy who is retweeting Nazis and who has reconfigured Twitter into a right-wing hellhole because he bought an electric car company and grew it is crazy. Ron, good try, but no, I'm not going there. Carl in, disagreeing with my callers today, Carl in Greenville, Michigan. Hey, Carl, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could give me any information on the strikes that are going on now.
Oh, I don't have anything up to date. The UAW is still on strike. They're moving from plant to plant in order to kind of spread the pain around and on the one hand, but also reduce the pain at the local level, so no one particular, group of factory workers gets badly wounded. But then there are also strike actions happening all over the country and in other arenas as well. I'm sorry, I don't have a list in front of me, Carl. Was there a reason for your question?
Well, how about the nurses? Are they still on strike? I can't even find out if they're still on strike.
Here in Portland, they're going on strike in a week or two. One of my kids works at the local hospital and was over for dinner on the weekend and telling us how they're preparing for the strike right now. They're getting ready, and that's just here. I mean, my understanding is that nurses are going on strike all over the country. You got teachers who are going on strike. It's a renaissance in the labor movement, and they've got a lot of public support, which I think is a really good thing. Carl, thanks for the call. Nicole in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Hey, Nicole, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. I'm not the one who's going to be arguing today. I thank you so much for all of your work. Yes, and what I was kind of gonna resound what you were talking about climate change in this world. If you travel, just like on a road trip, like I live in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and Door County is only like 2.5 hours away. This was like 4 years ago. There was a young lady, she's a waitress, and she was also a student. And she must have been studying something to do with climate change. She said that one of the islands in Door County disappeared due to climate change. That was like my...
Has it been an island in Lake Michigan?
Yes. Well, yes. Yeah,
Lake Michigan hasn't, the water levels of Lake Michigan have not significantly changed as a result of climate change, to the best of my knowledge.
Oh, well, living here, I live 1 block from Lake Michigan, and we have seen some serious changes here in Sheboygan. Really? And you only know these things if you live there, you know?
Well, what have the changes been like there, Nicole?
Well, the Sheboygan River has gone up so high that it was like to the point that it was going into a brand new restaurant, and they had to rebuild a whole area.
Yeah, that's because of the flooding, because the air holds more moisture now, and so the rainstorms are dropping more water in. Okay.
Right. And so the winds, we've had some winds here that are like 90 miles an hour. Like 2 years in a row, we had trees that toppled and totaled 2 cars in 2 years. That's like hurricane winds in Wisconsin.
That's climate instability. You're absolutely right.
And then, going to Puerto Rico, I'm half Puerto Rican. I went to Puerto Rico, one of the islands there that they made the Caribbean. What's the name of these? It was a series of movies with the famous actor that was like out there. Anyways, it was a movie that they made, and one of the islands in Puerto Rico is just totally gone. And you only know these things if you live in these areas or you travel. Yeah. So like you said, you were living in D.C., and it was just tremendous what happened to you. That must have been scary. So, there's a lot of instability in a lot of places.
Yeah.
So thank you for your commentary.
Yeah, so you wanted to call and basically testify about climate change, about what you're seeing with regard to climate change there. I get it.
Yeah.
Nicole, we need to batten down the hatches. It's going to be a tough ride, the next decade or two. The stuff that everybody was talking about for 2050 and 2080 is going to be here well before 2040, I believe, and probably before 2030.
Yeah, like you were saying, like we've gotten to a point that we cannot reverse it. It's like it's just going to go so fast. Yep. It's too late. And I think we're getting there, and that's very sad. But thank you so much, Mr. Hartmann.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. And it's time, like I said, it's time to hold to account the people who lied us into this. Margot in Sacramento. Hey, Margot, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I want to know how these Congress people can say that it wasn't an honest election, that it was rigged, and they have no proof.
Right.
Why can't we challenge them that they should have proof?
Oh, we have. They lost 60 court cases. They you know, a bunch of them are going to jail for this. I mean, you know, they're lying. This was a big lie that Donald Trump decided to push. And frankly, it worked because all the way back to the 1980s, the Republican Party has been doubling and tripling down on voter suppression, on making it harder to vote for Americans, on purging people of the voting rolls. Right now, there's a big scandal in Ohio because I think his name is Frank LaRose, the Secretary of State. Just, you know, there's an election going on right now. Early voting is happening right now in Ohio. And he just, in the middle of the election, purged a bunch of people, a bunch of Democrats off the voting rolls. And people
how can we allow these people, why can't somebody make a case against the Congress people that are lying and refusing to
there is no law against lying, Margot, unless you're under oath or you're talking to the FBI. There's no law against lying.
Okay, all right, okay, thank you.
That's the problem. I mean, you know, and I'm not sure it's a problem. I'm not sure that we would want a law against lying. I mean, this is free speech, but you know, these lies are extraordinarily destructive to our democracy, to any democracy, but particularly to ours. Margot, thank you for the call. Also, the Supreme Court. You know, when Ohio first started purging voters in a big way, this was in 2018, as I recall. They got sued before the Supreme Court, and the 5 justices, at that time was 5 right-wingers on the court, they said, that's fine, you can purge all the people you want.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
And so Ohio's doing it. If you're a Democrat in Ohio, particularly if you live in a neighborhood that has a lot of Democrats or a lot of black people in it, double check your voter registration, because they are purging people left and right. And welcome back. John in Ecuador. You're calling from Ecuador, John?
I am. I'm sitting here on my couch. Hummingbird's feeder needs to be refilled in just a moment.
Oh, my goodness.
Tom, I really appreciate the news that we get from you and information. And I have a little concern that your reporting on climate is what I hear from about 99% of reporting on climate. It's about the impacts, how we should have done something 20, 30, 40 years ago when the problem became obvious or convincing. And also, blame on corporations or business and government. And we actually need to be focusing at least 50% on solutions. And I have a couple of suggestions specifically on that. One is, last week, I think it was reintroduced for the 4th time, the Climate Innovation Act in the House, and it's for sure to be approved in the Senate. And this is something that every person who can pick up the phone or send an email or in some way contact their representative in government and tell them what they want government to do about climate. And they have a
What does the Climate Innovation Act do, John? I'm not familiar with this legislation.
Then for the fossil fuel companies are using the air that we breathe as a garbage dump.
Right.
With no charge. And usually you pay a fee when you go to the garbage dump.
Yep.
So a fee would be collected at the point of extraction for fossil fuels and then split evenly among U.S. households and families.
Oh, okay. So it's a carbon cap or a carbon fee and dividend program.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's been reintroduced, and you need to encourage every person that you know.
You know, Jay Inslee tried to do one of those in Washington State about 4 years ago, and he got it on the ballot. It was very popular. But then the fossil fuel industry came in and dumped hundreds of thousands of dollars in very deceptive advertising and got it shot down. It's just amazing.
That's the fact. But now again, the frame is guilt and blame, and we need to reframe this as a solution that people, individuals who are listening to you and that you influence, can pick up a phone and actually take action. And it's in the frame of solution, not in the frame of guilt and blame.
Yeah, I get all that. Although there's nothing wrong with guilt and blame. You've got a whole bunch of executives who literally became billionaires by destroying the planet, and they're continuing to buy off politicians, and they're continuing to sell lies about climate change. So I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time, John. I think we can hold people to account, and we can have solutions. In my article today, I talk about how wind and solar are now cheaper than any form of fossil fuel that's not subsidized.
Yeah. 50% on solutions and actionable solutions for people to take action with.
Yeah.
The second thing I would suggest is to invite Rattan Lal, R-A-T-T-A-N-L-A-L, 80 years old, continuing to do research at Ohio State, 40 and more years in researching for solutions that are available to us. His study, the carbon sequestration potential of terrestrial ecosystems, suggests that we could get 156 parts per million reduction using known agricultural practices.
Yeah.
So this should inform a complete realignment of the Farm Bill that is past this date and is being reconsidered.
Yeah, this information has been around for a long time, John, and it's solid. Yeah, thank you very much. It's 51 minutes past the hour. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio, and tag you're it. You know, between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. It's 8 minutes before the hour, picking up your calls here, and Mitch in Cleveland, Ohio. Hey, Mitch, what's on your mind today?
Hello?
Hey, Mitch, what's up?
Is this Tom?
It is. You're on the air.
Hey. Oh, that's okay. Great. Yeah, I just wanted to know what you think. What are your thoughts on the following? I know this might sound really a little bit unusual. So Hamas, as you know, was very violent, took off heads of women, children, et cetera, and obviously a terrible thing. No question about it. Horrible thing. The question is, what do you think is worse, that action or giving elementary school kids puberty blockers and trying to change their gender?
If it was being done involuntarily, the way that you're suggesting. Oh, Mitch, it's the good try, right? Good try. Virginia in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Virginia, what's on your mind today?
I want to talk about Israel. Thank you very much for having me on. I wanted to refer you to a peace group called the Compassionate Listening Project that was founded by an American Jewish woman named Leah Green. And I've been to Israel twice. I went there in 1980 with my stepmother's Mormon church group. I'm not Mormon, though. And then I went in 1991 with Leah Green. And what the forerunner of the Compassionate Listening Project was at the time. And I was astounded at how much worse the conditions the Palestinians were living under in 1991 than in 1980. And I know it's gotten much worse. And I would like you to hear from someone who is Jewish, who knows what the situation is from both sides. And I hope you can look them up. I think they're like Compassionate Listening Project on the internet, and they're also on Facebook, both Leah Green and another one of the co-leaders who's also Jewish named Susan Partnow. I don't have a phone number for them. I just have the website, and you have to like send something into their website.
Yeah. You know,
I wanted...
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You know, it's just that I've also studied the situation, and I have a degree in zoology from the University of California at Davis. And my particular academic interest was evolutionary biology, and I had to take a lot of genetics. And that was one of my particular interests. When I looked at this, I looked up on the internet if there was a genetic relationship between the Jews and the Palestinians. And indeed, they share a lot of genetic markers.
Yeah, they're both Semitic people.
Yeah, well, what I think the Palestinians are is the Jews who remained behind after the various diasporas, which actually preceded Jesus. You know, I mean, there's Assyrian and Babylonian invasions. And essentially, they were the Jews who were forced to convert at the point of a sword to Christianity or to Islam. And so, in a sense, there is an ethnic relationship that's quite strong. And then the other thing is that I've looked at this history, and I can refer you to websites that you would probably consider in high regard. I have one from the McGill University, which is talking about the fact that the Palestinians were compensated for their land during the period of the British Mandate. Britain they had their own Jewish problem, ethnically prejudiced against their own Jews. So they sent them to Palestine, and they actually purchased land for them.
I know.
But after World War II, the Palestinians were forcibly ejected from their land. And again, in 1967, after the 1967 Six-Day War, the Palestinians were ejected.
Yeah, I get all that.
Violent.
And none of that is going to solve today's problem. But you're right. You know, and right now, I think Israel has begun an overreaction that is going to hurt them more than it's going to help them. Virginia, thank you for the call. We're hitting the top of the hour. We'll be right back on the other side of this break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Chenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners in the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The hole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction, the disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. The most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it, and then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book, Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shen.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, welcome to the third hour of our program. We have a new Speaker of the House. His name is Congressman Mike Johnson. He's from Louisiana. He says that women have abortions after the baby is born, and the Democrats like that. Seriously, he's said that. He said that Trump won the 2020 election. Seriously, he said that. This is the guy that Trump wanted as Speaker of the House. This shows he got 220 votes. Every single Republican voted for him. He says that January 6th was a legitimate protest. He says that COVID is a hoax and vaccines are dangerous. He says that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. He wants to cut Medicare. And he says that climate change is a hoax. He's the perfect candidate for America's right-wing billionaires and fascists. And it just happened that fast. I mean, Trump and his buddies got behind this guy and move him right in there, because nobody in America knows who Mike Johnson is. You'd have to be from Louisiana to know who he is. This is the next year and a half, we're going to see efforts. If Mike Johnson is true to form, if he is consistent, if he stays the man that he has been up until this point, back when he was the head lawyer with the Alliance Defending Freedom, or American ADF, Americans Defending whatever it is, he is the guy. They are the people who put together the lawsuit that ended the right to abortion in the United States. This is now your Speaker of the House. The guy who thinks that gay marriage should be outlawed, not just no longer sanctioned, but outlawed. That's your new Speaker of the House. The guy who thinks that you shouldn't get COVID vaccines because they're dangerous. That's your new Speaker of the House. The guy who claims that women have abortions after the baby is born, they kill the baby and they call it an abortion. And Democrats like that. That guy is now your Speaker of the House. The guy who wants to end Social Security, turn it over to the big banks because after all, it's a Ponzi scheme. That guy is now your Speaker of the House. The Republicans now have their very own poster child. This is MAGA. This is what the MAGA Republicans are all about. Is criminalizing abortion, ending Social Security, privatizing Medicare, rewriting the history of the attempted coup against our government on January 6th, bringing Donald Trump back and making him emperor for life of the United States. They'll probably change the name of the country, too. It'll probably be the MAGA States of America, right? The guy who says that climate change is a hoax, even as it's happening all around us, because the fossil fuel billionaires who fund his career say, hey, help us out here. That guy is now our Speaker of the House. Mind-blowing. Meanwhile, down in Florida, the state of Florida is asking the U.S. Supreme Court to block a lower court ruling that said that you can't prohibit drag shows. It's really interesting. Hamburger Mary's is a restaurant in Orlando that regularly has family-friendly Sunday morning drag shows that, you know, bring your kids, family-friendly. This is, I mean, you know, drag shows are not, I used to, there was a gay bar in Lansing, Joe Cavello's, back when I was a teenager and I was working in radio. I was working at WITL as a DJ. Actually, at that time, I was working at WVIC as a DJ because it was the progressive rock station. And, you know, they hired me for a couple of nights to MC the drag show because their regular person was not around. And Louise and I used to go down there and dance, and it's just, you know, drag shows are not about sex. They're about performance. They're an art form. They're a form of speech, in fact, is what the lower court is saying. I mean, you know, if the Supreme Court could say that, you know, Debbie Does Dallas or The Devil and Miss Jones or whatever, I guess it was Deep Throat was the movie back in the 60s. If they could say that and the movies like that, the ones that I named, that those were legal because it was a free speech, First Amendment right of expression to show porn, I mean, then something much, much dramatic, I mean, in a completely different category, really, a drag show is at the very least free speech, wouldn't you think? So anyhow, Ron DeSantis has his anti-drag show legislation, and Hamburger Mary's is suing. Hamburger Mary's regularly hosts drag shows. This is from the Associated Press, including family-friendly performances on Sundays that children are invited to attend. The restaurant owner said the law was overly broad, was written vaguely, and violated First Amendment rights by chilling speech. Now, they're facing the possibility of losing their liquor license or even being shut down, and that the guy who owns the restaurant could go to jail. So they're taking a principled stand here in Orlando, and good on them. Meanwhile, speaking of, you know, your GOP, Tommy Tuberville, we've got, you know, the Fifth Fleet heading for Israel. You've got Taiwan talking about China talking about taking on Taiwan. You've got, you know, major problems with the war, this terrorist attack against Ukraine from Russia that is ongoing. Another terror attack yesterday killed a bunch of people. And Tommy Tuberville is still saying, nah, you know, we're not going to let the military have their promotions. We're not going to let the Army and the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Air, we're not going to let them have leadership at the top. Now what's happening is that some people in the Senate are starting to have a conversation about this, because what Tuberville is doing, who by the way has never served in our military, so he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And what he is doing is damaging our military. Now, where did this whole idea that an individual senator can blow up military promotions come from? It goes back to the George Washington administration. His Secretary of Defense, it was the Secretary of War back then, was Henry Knox. Henry Knox was the guy who, in 1789, rode up to George Washington's plantation, and George was out standing in the field, and Henry Knox rode up to him on his horse and said, "You've just been elected president, and they want you in New York to be sworn in." And Henry Knox was the guy that George Washington said, go up to Connecticut and find this guy who makes American-made clothing. It was against the law back then to make American-made clothing. You had to buy it from England. This was one of the things that provoked the American Revolution. And he said, go up to Connecticut and find this guy. His name is Dan Hinsdale, and he's a tailor, and have him make me an American-made suit to get inaugurated in. And Knox went up there and he got the suit. He had Washington's measurements and he brought it to New York City, which was then the capital of the United States, down near Wall Street. And George Washington was sworn into office wearing a brown American-made wool suit. He then, later in the day, posed for that famous painting in which he's wearing black and white, black and a white shirt. That was British-made clothing for the painting, for the famous painting that Dolly Madison saved when the White House got sacked and burned by the British troops in 1812, or I guess it was 1813 or 1814, the War of 1812. But that was Henry Knox. So anyhow, Henry Knox wanted to make sure that his relatively small officer corps wasn't, all concentrated in one place. He wanted the officers to be from all over the country. And so he and George got together and came up with this plan to require home state senators to vouch for the nominees for promotions in the military. It was an ethical thing. It was a way of kind of keeping our military non-political. Well, that's not how it's turned out. Now what we have is our military being highly politicized by a guy who's never served in the military, Tommy Tuberville, Coach Tuberville. In fact, a guy whose claim to fame is that he was a football coach at a university. And this whole plan to keep the military brass from being in the pockets of the president or of individual senators is just, out the window. It's gone. So anyhow, the senators are getting together and saying, maybe we should change the rules. It only takes 51 votes to change the Senate rules. And if they could change the rules so that Tuberville can no longer do this, then they could, start batch processing these appointees. I'm guessing that they're going to get there, that they're pretty much fed up and saying, this is it. We're gonna move forward on this. But, I'm not holding my breath. That's it. All right, it's 16 minutes past the hour. That's it for my rants for the day. I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. What do you think about our new Speaker of the House? How is this going to play out? Well, what kind of damage is he going to do to our country?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. It's 17 minutes past the hour. And welcome back, Jim in Chicago. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. It's always good to hear from you. Just going back to the whole Hamburger Mary's drag queen, why don't the Republicans and DeSantis invite Giuliani to come perform, because he has a little experience with that.
Or Trump.
I believe. Yes.
I mean, anyway, actually, maybe I'm thinking of Giuliani was in drag with Trump, and Trump was kissing him on the cheek. Is that the picture I'm remembering?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So it wasn't Trump who was in drag, it was Giuliani. All right.
Anyway, the hypocrisy is just, it's sickening. And so I've called in before. I've been a flight attendant for 24 years, and flown internationally hundreds and probably thousands of times at this point. So without identifying what airline I work for, because they have very strict policy about speaking out loud, we were almost 2 hours early coming back from Europe to Chicago the other day.
Is that because there was no wind?
There was no wind. In fact, we had a tailwind going westbound.
That doesn't happen.
Which
that makes no sense at all.
It did, but it did.
Wow.
And it's throwing the operations into chaos, because westbound flights going to Europe are we were late
Eastbound,
actually getting, going to Europe. We were late getting there by about an hour, and it affected our legal rest because we had to have 24 hours off, and we didn't because we were an hour late.
Right.
So they had to delay the flight back. so we would have our legal rest, and we were still 2 hours early.
Wow. Wow. Is this
and
because of
going
the
to the
changes
whole-
in the jet stream, that the jet stream is now drooling down into the mid latitudes where it never used to go?
Well, it's not coming as far south, so I'm no expert. I'm just going based on my experience.
Right.
Something's happening.
Yeah.
This is not normal.
Yeah.
And the whole Acapulco thing, when I get on a vacation, when I go somewhere, my phone is turned off. I am detached. My family knows where I am. They know I'm safe. But I turn my phone off. And the fact that this hurricane or tropical storm turned into a Category 5 hurricane in 24 hours, I wouldn't have known.
In 9 hours.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It went from during the day, I guess it would have been 9 hours between 1 a.m. You can do the math on that. It was they were predicting landfall, and the peak winds were at 50 miles an hour. And 9 hours later, it hit land as a Category 5, 165 mile an hour sustained winds hurricane. There's going to be very little left of Acapulco.
Well, and the thing is, like I said, when I go on vacation, I turn my phone off.
Yeah. You know what this reminds me of,
go to
Jim,
the
is
beach and
the
I stay
horror
away
movies.
from people. Yeah.
You know, it's like, hey, something funny is going on in the water, and it's like, oh, it's the monster from the Blue Lagoon. You know, he's getting ready to come up, and it's like we're in that first phase of the horror movie where he turns the TV on and something funny in the sky here. I don't know what it is. Maybe some people say it's a flying saucer. I think that's unlikely, but there's something going on. We're there.
Thanks for taking my call, Tom. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Jim. And good luck. Or thank you. Thank you for the update. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Fort Lauderdale, Florida recently got whacked with 25 inches of rainfall in less than 7 hours. Tornadoes are tearing up the South and the Midwest in ways that they haven't seen, frankly, ever before. I mean, there have always been tornadoes, but not like these. 200-mile-an-hour winds, these derecos that are a mile long. We have a serious crisis going on right now. There's also a major El Nino. It's off the coast of Peru right now. It's affecting the West Coast. So we're seeing wild swings from drought to floods to drought to floods in the West Coast. Climate change is here. Climate change is real, and climate change is a crisis. What do we know about it? What do we know about these things? How much worse is it going to get before it might get better? What can we do about it? We had a long conversation with Dr. Michael Mann, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media at the University of Pennsylvania. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 23 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Brian in Beverly Hills. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom. Let me turn my volume on the computer down.
Yep, thank you.
Yes, thanks. So I first wanted to say I really liked Victoria's call, I believe was her name, right before the end of the last hour. She made some great points. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about Israel and Palestine, if it's all right.
Sure.
So I called a couple of weeks ago, and I said some things about Zionism and everything. But today I'd like to first point out, because it was just said, the Palestinians are Semites, right? It all has to do with language origins,
right?
The Semitic languages. So, in a sense, if they're being bombed, that's an anti-Semitic campaign.
I know, technically you're right. Yeah.
Technically, so I just wish that the narrative would change a little bit, because if you really don't like Jews, you can say I'm anti-Jewish. That's what the word should be if you don't like Jews. If you're just going to say anti-Semitism, it's kind of generic at this point in our history.
Technically, but there is a cultural understanding. The vast majority of people believe that when you say anti-Semitic, you're saying anti-Jewish.
I understand that.
I get the distinction,
I'm
Brian, but
Yeah. Okay. So the other request which I also made, is I really would like, because I read a lot about this stuff and I know a lot about it, but I'm not an expert and I'm not an authority on the entire issue. So I'm requesting, I don't know, maybe you guys have tried already, but just get somebody on that has some history context. Like there's, Norman Finkelstein is an amazing scholar. You got Naomi Klein out there that can say a lot. You've got Ilan Pape, which I'm sure you've had on your show many times. Nico Peled. There are many people that need to. Without hearing that perspective, we're missing an enormous perspective or a part of it.
Yeah.
So that's another request. And then, if I may, I just want to say also, but I think often, the Western mindset is that we remedy problems. We don't fix problems. We like to remedy problems. And that's what I feel is happening and has happened over the past 75 years, is it's always been a remedy to fix the Palestinian issue. We've never solved the problem because we're not really willing to solve the problem.
Well,
the problem
I don't know about we, but
occupation.
certainly you've had these right-wing governments that are absolutely and unalterably opposed to a two-state or a three-state solution, and that is not going to solve anything. As I've said this multiple times now, this attack by Hamas was not justified in any way, but it was predictable.
I agree.
It was predictable that there would be an explosion.
Absolutely predictable.
Because you can't keep 2 million people in an open-air prison for 20 years and not expect them to blow up in your face.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Is there a Phil Littner out there that can get us some?
I don't know, Brian, and I really am very uncomfortable discussing how we should be programming our show on the air. Typically, we ask Mark, our call screener, to take those calls. When people have suggestions for the program, write them down and pass them along to me. I don't like them on the air. Michael in Barrington Hills, Illinois. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for all you do, and you have some great callers too. Yeah, we need more programs like yours. This isn't as important as the speaker's thing that you had now, but the World War I, it really complicated.
Michael, excuse me, forgive my interrupting, but we're hitting a break here, and I didn't realize that I was that close to it. I'm going to put you on hold, and I'm going to pick you up on the other side of the break, okay?
Okay.
Because it's just not fair to you to come on with 10 seconds to talk. We'll be right back. 27 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls. Michael's call first, right after this break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back with more of your calls right here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the True People's Media.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. This is from Chapter 1, although the introduction is fascinating too, where she talks about, Rhodes scholarships and stuff, but this is Chapter 1. I sit in the living room, a cozy space, warm in the early summer. I'm perched on the edge of a sofa next to Valerie, the home's owner, a lovely black woman in her late 40s. Across from us, seated close together on a wide settee meant for one, are her two children, a son and a daughter. Politicians rarely visit their streets, which are nestled in a poorer community in South Georgia. Valerie beams with pride that both her children are headed to college in the fall. David, 17, plans to study criminology. Maya, 18, her belly round with her first child, intends to become a middle school teacher. Both newly graduated from high school, Maya will give birth in mere weeks and begin college months later, an unwed teen mother. Her intended school is more than 3 hours north of her home, so her mother will raise her newborn baby while she starts her freshman year. Valerie speaks matter-of-factly about the coming challenge, raising a new child just as hers leaves the nest. Still, she is determined that both her children pursue college degrees that she never received. Maya, the mother-to-be, wonders how she'll do so far away from home and her baby. Yet in the next breath, she explains how college will be the best for her and her child. Their future success rests upon her. I've come to their home as part of my campaign for governor, so I asked Valerie what she expects of someone like me. What can I do to help make lives like hers better? In her soft voice, she replies, she just wants options for financial aid for her children. They will succeed, she says, if they can afford to stay in school. modest home passed down through the generations, I understand both the pride and the desperation tangled in her response. She got them through and has given them the tools to carve out better lives for themselves. We chat more about the worries she's lived with all those years, our discussion turning to the crime and poverty in their neighborhood. Then I ask Valerie what she wants. At first, all I get in response is a quizzical look to suggest I need to reconsider my bid for higher office. Or that suggests. I repeat, what do you want for you? What secret dream do you have for yourself? Her confused expression turns to one of surprise. I don't know, she tells me. I've been a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. You must want something, I probe, something you'd like to do for you? A daycare, she admits quietly. I'd like to start a daycare center for unwed mothers like my daughter, so more girls can finish school and pursue their dreams. But that ambition is beyond her. Her body language, her tone of voice, her averted gaze speak louder than her words. I press her, but she demurs with a smile. Let's just see what happens if you win the governor's job, she says. Valerie's house in South Georgia is not too different from the squat red brick house where I grew up on South Street in Gulfport, Mississippi. An oak tree grew out in our front yard, shadowing the front sidewalk, forbidding grass to grow beneath its shade. Pink azaleas bloomed each spring from bushes that flanked the front door. Our rented house and the other set close by teemed with children, all black, all working class. We played in our postage-stamped yards, make believing the fantastical, superhero exploits, cops and robbers. As we got older, we'd talk about moving to New Orleans or living in one of the mansions along the beachfront that lay less than 5 miles away, across the railroad tracks that ran in between our neighborhood and the more wealthy environs. We dreamed of more, while our parents' lives centered around survival and making it from paycheck to paycheck. Instinctively, we understood that more had to be possible, even if we didn't know what to do to get there. These imaginings, these desires, are the roots of ambition. As adults, like Valerie, we tend to edit our desires until they fit our construction of who we're supposed to become. In such a world, I wouldn't dare dream of running for higher office, for mayor or governor or president. At least for now, Valerie sees herself retiring in 20 more years from Piggly Wiggly as a cashier, rather than as a small business owner who helps the community raise its children. From our brief meeting, I could see she had the fire, albeit of a low burn, of a minority leader. She had ambition, she had vision, but she didn't have the faith, and understandably so. Whether we come from working class neighborhoods or grow up comfortably middle class, minorities rarely come of age explicitly thinking about what we want and how to get it. People already in power almost never have to think about whether they belong in the room, much less if they would be listened to once outside. These men, and they are usually men and typically white, do not have to grapple with low expectations based on gender or race or class. Ambition for them begins with reminiscences of old times and older friendships or newer alliances. The ends have already been decided. Only the means are to be discussed. Most potential minority leaders feel the same lack of faith Valerie had, at least at some point in their evolution. We may not know how to get the first job, let alone make it to the big chair. We don't know how to take the leap from accepting our fates to actually changing them, and not just a little, but radically. Then there are those who simply don't know what they want. The drive to achieve burns inside, often without a clear target. We want to be something, but what that is remains hazy. Often we cannot articulate our goals because they lie just beyond the reach of who we're supposed to be. Ambition's scale is irrelevant. What holds us back is not scope, it's fear. And because we don't know what to call our dreams, don't know how to make them happen, or are pretty sure we'll be disappointed, we just stand still. We become a minority, but becoming a minority leader demands that we embrace ambition as our due. Stacey Abrams.
From international trade policy to immigration policy to housing, we've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. So now the autopsy has come out. Manuel Esteban Paez Terán, who is known by his friends as Tortuguita, is a young man who was a climate activist. He's actually originally from Venezuela, but he was down in Georgia, along with a lot of other people, protesting what is called Cop City, where they're ripping up a whole bunch of forest down there to build a phony urban environment where police can practice urban warfare or something like that. And there's been a lot of protests against this. And the police claimed that he had shot a cop, and therefore they shot him. 57 times, in fact, shot him dead. Now the autopsy has come out. It turns out he was sitting on the forest floor on his cross-legged with his hands in the air at the time he was shot. The police are still lying about this. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back, 35 minutes past the hour. And picking up your calls here, Melissa in, whoops, hang on here. Melissa in Valdosta, Georgia. Hey, Melissa, what's on your mind today?
Hey, actually, I'm from Savannah, Georgia, but that's okay.
Oh, Savannah, I'll fix that, okay. So what's up?
That's fine. So Sunday, I think it was Sunday, there's one individual on TikTok that's pretty informative that I listen to. And he was saying that he heard from a news station and BBC that Putin had a cardiac arrest in his bedroom suite.
Yeah, that was widely reported 2 days ago. It's being denied by the Kremlin.
That's what I heard this morning. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were.
I have not seen, I've only sort of half paid attention to this because when the first reports came out, they were all over Twitter, and I thought, okay, Twitter, let's see where this goes. And it never made its way into the New York Times, the Washington Post kind of media. So I thought, maybe it's just Ukrainian disinformation campaign or just an anti-Putin, campaign to make him look bad. But then, a couple days went by. Today, I believe it was, earlier this morning, our time, the Kremlin came out and officially denied it. But Putin himself hasn't come out and said, ta-da, here I am, guys. Now, maybe he has, and I just don't know. But to the best of my knowledge, he has not made an appearance since these reports. So that's
what I was thinking. But then this morning, it was also being reported on a station out of China and out of Australia. And so that's what made me think, okay, well, maybe there is some news to this, and maybe they're trying to cover it up.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, Putin just came back from Beijing. He just came back from this meeting with President Xi, the love fest that they were having. And that's a long flight, and it dehydrates you, and, that all makes you more vulnerable to things like blood clots that can, be involved with heart attacks. I'm not a physician. I'm no expert on this, but I do know that, I've traveled a lot for years and years and years, and Louise and I used to own a travel agency, and a lot of people I know who travel regularly on these long, 6, 8, 10-hour flights where the relative humidity in an airplane is like 5%. It's pretty much non-existent. Yeah. And it dries you right out. And people take baby aspirin for those flights so that they don't get deep vein thrombosis and they don't get heart attacks. And so I'm wondering if that might be what hit Putin, or if it's just stress, or maybe it's just, like I said, it's just a disinformation campaign. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. I was just wanting to see what your thoughts were.
Okay. Thanks a lot for the call, Melissa. We'll all keep an eye on it. And say hi to Savannah for me. I love your town. It's been a long time since I've been there, but I love Savannah, Georgia. Jonathan in Mobile, Alabama. Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind today?
A lot. How are you?
I'm fine. What's up?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk to you about my senator, Tommy Tuberville.
Oh, jeez.
And, yeah.
You have my sympathies.
Oh, thank you. I know that a lot of people would kind of dismiss him as, being like a buffoon and a moron. Well, with good reason. But I'm not entirely convinced of that because I do have a theory as to why, he's blocking all these appointments.
Okay, I have a theory too. What's yours?
Well, as you know, like Donald Trump's main enemy was the administrative state.
Yep.
And I think that's what Tommy Tuberville is trying to do. I think what he's trying to do, he's trying to deploy like a larger strategy.
Yep.
Secretly hoping that Trump would get back in 2024. Yep.
That's the basis of my theory too, Jonathan, is that we know now that it was the military that stopped Donald Trump from having the military go out and seize voting machines and things like that, and basically, nationalize the 2020 election and make himself emperor. It was the military who stopped him, specifically Mark Milley, but a few others. And I think that Tommy Tuberville is trying to decapitate our military command structure, and so that when Trump becomes president, he can instantly replace them with fascists who will go, gung-ho with Trump, using the military to take over America, to gin up a military coup. Tommy Tuberville, on the evening before January 6th, was in the Trump Hotel, in Trump's private quarters, planning the January 6th attack on our country with Don Jr. and Eric, among other people, Giuliani and others. And I see him as, Putin's guy in the Senate, along with Rand Paul.
Yeah, and for me, what's really scary, this might be a long shot, but I mean, I'm old enough to remember, you and I are both old enough to remember the Mueller investigation, right?
Yeah. Don't have to be that old.
Yeah, it's abundantly clear that Donald Trump has obstructed justice, right?
Oh, yeah, they identified 10 specific examples of it, all of which could be prosecuted if Bill Barr had decided to.
Right, and so I guess where I'm getting at is the main reason why Trump was not indicted for obstruction of justice is because of an FBI policy that goes against what the law says.
Right. It was a DOJ policy, but yes.
Right. And so I'm thinking that really sets a dangerous precedent if Tommy Tuberville and Donald Trump get their way. It's not outside the realm of possibility that all these cabinet positions that are full of Trump MAGA hats would probably implement their own policies to be like, oh, yeah, I know that's what the law says, but, we are writing our own policy going against it. I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
I completely agree. And by the way, that policy that the DOJ will not investigate or prosecute a sitting president, that started with a lawyer working for Richard Nixon in the Justice Department who wrote that memo. It might have been Ruckelshaus. I'm not sure who it was. I knew at one time. But it was when they were looking at prosecuting Richard Nixon. And so Nixon's guy said, oh, no, you can't look at prosecuting the sitting president. And then the second time that policy within the Department of Justice was basically ratified, examined again, was during the Bill Clinton-Monica Lewinsky investigation. And so Bill Clinton's lawyer in the Department of Justice wrote, we really shouldn't be looking at the president. So, in both cases, those lawyers were badly compromised. And the whole policy of the Department of Justice, which is supposed to look into crimes, can't look into crimes committed by a guy in the White House, is nuts. I mean, it's just nuts.
Yeah.
So I'm with you, Jonathan. I hope that they change that. I really do. Jonathan, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Nate in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Nate, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Good to talk to you. I don't broadcast and I don't talk about my military experience just because I flew Apaches. It's a very different experience than an infantryman. Mm-hmm. But some of the comments that I'm hearing from the left, I'm not a warmonger, but I'm a hawk at heart. And what Hamas has done to Israel, this is beyond the pale. Yep. I understand people's reservations. I have reservations. Netanyahu's a killer. These men have been in the military. I've killed, so I'm a killer. But we have to support these guys. They're our closest partners, probably our second closest ally behind the Brits. And they got hit in the most beyond the pale, disgusting, just awful assault on their country. We need to put the historical reasons, what led up to this, aside for a moment, and we need to get behind our friends because they took it on the chin.
Yeah, I think America is largely supportive of Israel. The problem that we're facing right now, Nate, is that in response to killing 1,400 Israelis, Israel has already killed over 5,000 Palestinians.
Yeah.
They are inflicting on the entire population of Gaza, or at least half of it, they are inflicting mass punishment. They're cutting off their water and their electricity. That is a violation of international law. One of the things that you do with your friends, if they're truly your friends, is you tell them when they're making a mistake. And it's what Joe Biden said to
President
Netanyahu.
Biden was absolutely right. He had to say that.
Yeah, don't go too far.
I agree with that. I mean, I'm not here for, targeting civilians and doing the things that they're doing, but this is what my fear is that, for lack of a better term, like an Old Testament type of fight. Like this is, the Black Flag type of thing. I mean, they are mad. I mean,
with justification,
getting really
absolutely. But if they can figure, and so far they've been holding off, and good on them. God bless them. Holding off on a ground invasion, but they're going to have to get in there and get into those tunnels and take out Hamas that way. And it's going to be
dirty.
It's going to be very dirty, and it's going to be very bloody. And if they do it in a way that is, just brute force, it will reduce the Israeli casualties. But it's going to radically increase the civilian casualties on the Gaza side. And
it's going to be an absolute disaster. There's no way that this ends good.
I agree, and that's why I'm glad that so far they have held back. Apparently, we had a big say in that. And I would like to see Hamas destroyed. I'm horrified by them, and they in my mind there's no redeeming quality for this organization.
No.
Nuke them, or not nuke them, but you know what I mean. Take them out.
No, absolutely. No, I know the leadership.
But
for
don't
sure.
punish the civilians. Don't.
No.
There's no. I mean, all you do when you do that is you turn the world against you, and that's the worst thing that can happen to Israel.
Yep, and with Hezbollah and all the other allies and militant groups.
There you go. Yep, Nate, I got to run, but thank you for the call. I think we're on the same page here. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So Mike Johnson is now being sworn in as Speaker. How long before he puts through a nationwide abortion ban that he's been so gung-ho about? And welcome back, Denise in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. A while back, you were talking about a Supreme Court challenge to a program's funding to become unconstitutional. And if that Supreme Court funding for this program, and I can't remember the name of the program, was voted on by the Supreme Court to be unconstitutional, it would open the gateways for the Social Security and Medicare funding. Do you remember what that program was, and did they vote on it yet?
Wow. I don't. I'm sorry.
Okay. It's okay. It was about probably 3 weeks or a month ago, and I've been trying to find out about it.
I remember the story, and I think it might have been the Moore v. U.S. case. It was the case. Oh, I know what it was. It was the case around the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, the CFPB. And the argument that is being made before the Supreme Court, and they have, I don't know if they've heard the argument yet or not. I'd have to go back and look. But if they haven't, they will soon. And the argument that is being made is that the Constitution says that Congress has to appropriate all money that are spent by the government and raise all taxes that are, money into the government. And that Congress created a funding mechanism for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that was independent of future and ongoing congressional appropriations. The CFPB is funded out of the budget of the Fed, and the Fed has its own, essentially, income source. And so the argument is that that's unconstitutional because Congress isn't appropriating the money every year. And the problem is if the Supreme Court says, yes, that you're right, that is unconstitutional, and Congress must appropriate the money every year, then Social Security and Medicare are both funded by similar mechanisms with a separate tax, the FICA tax that is not re-litigated or reappropriated every year. And therefore, the Supreme Court could be blowing up the mechanism by which Social Security and Medicare are funded. I'm guessing that that argument is being made very clearly right now in the legal media, in the legal press. And I'm guessing that if the Supreme Court does rule against the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, because there's a bunch of right-wing billionaires and big corporations who are in tight with the right-wingers on the court, who are, all over this thing. They hate the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It has recovered, I think, over $15 billion, certainly over $10 billion. I don't remember the exact amount, but a lot of money for American consumers, and gives it back to consumers. When your bank rips you off, they get the money back to the bank and give the money back to you. And the banksters hate this, and the conservatives on the court hate this. So my guess is they're going to try and figure out how they can destroy the CFPB, but they're going to probably figure out some loophole or some little, sneaky strategy where it doesn't, in the process, take out Social Security and Medicare, because they don't, they realize how unpopular that would be. That would be, that would be as bad as legalizing, criminalizing abortion.
Yeah, that would be devastating.
Yeah.
Personally and nationwide.
Yeah.
The other quick thing I had was with Medicare, the supplements. In Michigan, we used to have like A through a whole bunch of programs and supplements, and now we only have 2, G and N. And I think what's happening is the insurance companies are trying to price the people on supplements out of the supplement programs.
They may well be. It may well be a strategy to try and push people into Medicare Advantage, which is much more profitable. I just don't know the details of that in Michigan, Denise. I'm sorry. But thank you for the call. We'll be right back 10 minutes before the hour. And poor Michael, I forgot he's on hold. I'll be right back with you, Michael. So back in 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, we were in the depths of the Great Depression. He raised the top income tax rate on billionaires from 25% to 90%. The ultra-rich were screaming, and here's what he had to say.
A number of my friends who belong in the very high upper bracket have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am re-elected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
He just took it right to them, right? Now, what came out of that was the world's largest and fastest growing and first major middle class. We can do this again. We just have to raise taxes on rich people. It's pretty straightforward. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. And welcome back. Michael in Barrington Hills, Illinois. Michael, I'm so sorry. I apologize. I put you on hold at the bottom of the hour, and then I came back on the other side of the break and completely spaced the fact that I had done that. It's not been my day today. Michael, I'm sorry. What's up? What's on your mind today?
I'm just replying to the caller. First of all, though, I wanted to say thanks also for geeky science. I really enjoy you bringing those in.
Thank you.
But in terms of the caller who was on World War I, he seemed to be drawing a parallel analog between Wilson and getting us into World War I, and then afterward, and what might happen to our presidency now. But the World War I was a terrible war, stupid war. But at that time in 2016, the Germans had lifted the ban of torpedoing merchant marines, and they just sunk one ship after another. And I think
1916.
Now,
remember the Lusitania, or am I remembering the wrong war?
Yeah, that was a little before that, but that was before that actually. Okay. But in 2016 and 2017, the beginning.
1916.
I'm sorry, 1916. Yeah, the FDR was the assistant secretary, and he was a bit of a war hawk, and he wanted to show that the Navy was important, and he was building the Navy up with his help from his superiors and all that. And that's what happened. Wilson was really resistant until April 1917, when he brought us into the war. It also reminded me of Steven Pinker's book on Angels of a Better Nature, I guess it was called. He did a little bit of a poll with people and said, what's the most important person of of the 20th century. And he went through a number of people. And you know who he suggested? I guess he suggested it. It was Gavrilo Princip, who shot. He's the Bosnian Serb.
Oh, the guy who shot Archduke Ferdinand. Yeah.
And he said if that had not happened, we would have a simply different 20th century, according to what he thought.
But no doubt about it. The World War I shaped the 20th century, in large part through breaking up the Ottoman Empire.
Exactly.
Because they aligned themselves with Germany and, ended up just being shattered.
They did, yeah. They had all those pacts, those agreements, and that drew us into the war after that.
Yep.
Or started the war. Thank you very much.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Michael, thanks for the history. I appreciate it. Glenn in Aliso Viejo, California. Hey, Glenn, you want to talk about our new speaker? Mike, you can't have an abortion, Johnson?
Yes, Tom. He's also a COVID denier, right?
Yep.
Vaccines and
yeah,
and he also is for anti-abortion, for health care for women. They can't make their own choice. We have to let a right-winger decide what our women do.
And he's opposed to aid to Ukraine.
Yeah, it's just a terrible day for America. My father was a veteran, Royal Air Force, and, he told me how they dragged Mussolini through the streets of Italy after all his lies.
Yep.
They're going to try to impeach Biden, which is just terrible.
He's one of the guys who signed on to that.
Right. That's probably the first thing they'll try to do. They violently want to take over the election. They're sore losers when they can't get the votes.
Yep.
They're going to throw out all this propaganda. It's really a terrible day for America. And I kind of wish we would have voted for McCarthy. The Democrats, this might have backfired, but I think in the long run, it was inevitable
Here's the good news, Glenn. The Senate is still controlled by the Democrats, and there's still a Democrat in the White House. So, Mike Johnson can pass wackadoodle legislation to criminalize abortion, whatever he wants, to impeach Biden. None of it's going to go anywhere. You're going to have a year and a half, or you're going to have the next 14, 15 months of basically, gridlock. How much damage it'll do to America is still an open question. And it will do damage, but, I don't think it's going to be as bad as we fear. Glenn, thanks for the call. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, which includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!